I avoided bourbon, but not scotch. Scotch. I found it helped me sleep, but upon further discrimination and many scientific trials, I decided it helped me do something like sleep. I pushed it aside. I even poured out one of the half-full bottles in my drawer. Not the other one, though. Just one. 2 weeks before, I left the Corps. Unwillingly, grudgingly, silently, at my own request, but I left. I resigned. Not in disgrace, but don't show your face around here again, buddy, was the implication. For about a fortnight, I toasted my discharge in a motel in Jacksonville, North Carolina. I stayed at a terrible place, drinking more of that scotch, wishing I had a friend, finding one in the bottle. I was not suicidal. I did what we all should do when we have no one to go to. And there was no one. The major warned me. You are a candidate for all sorts of neurotic behaviors, Lieutenant. Depression, anxiety, alcoholism, fantasies. Don't give in to them. You did what you could. You did right. The system failed you. Hell, the system eats up moral decisions and doesn't even spit them out. Talk to that priest friend of yours. Get a girlfriend. If they can handle it, talk to your parents. Get a counselor or a therapist. But remember, alligator is off limits. Alligator is classified. They are already considering declassifying it. So it should come off the list. But not yet. Soon, maybe. For 2 years, Major Marks had steered me through a pseudo-legal system of innuendo, implication, half-truth, and exhaustive restatement, threat, cynicism, and frustration. 2 years repeating the same story, recounting the same action on the same day, over and over while my interrogators looked for a flaw, for a changed word or idea, a discrepancy. I was the main character in a novel by Rob Grillett. Each chapter repeated with only a small change here, a nip and tuck there. Finally, the major brokered a decision that the Corps would not pursue charges like mutiny or murder or disobedience of orders. In return, all I had to do was resign, accept an honorable discharge, and get the hell out of our Marine Corps. So I did. It was probably for the best. I was starting to smell like Camp Lejeune, and Camp Lejeune smelled like Dewars. And I thought Dewars smelled more and more like kerosene. So I drove home to Mom and Dad, taking my time, using secondary roads, eating in little diners with girls waiting on me, listening to their southern accents, ordering grits and ham and greasy burgers. I avoided thought about my future. I wore civilian clothes, but my high and tight gave me away for a serviceman and especially a Marine. My Mustang was only 2.5 years old, paid off, and worked wonders for my attitude, keeping me on an even keel. It was my most important possession, except for that Dewar's half bottle in the trunk. I found a little, run-down motel along the highway, just across the Ohio as it was getting dark, and I put in. I could have made it all the way home, but I was in no hurry. No one knew I was coming. I was a low expectation. I could not sleep without the Dewars, but I didn't drink it anyway. There were too many arms and legs in my mind, too many women in burqas clutching babies, too many dead Marines. I think I needed a sleeping pill. How do I get that? Walk into a doctor's office and say, "Hey, I got some people killed and I'd like some pills to make me forget?" Or maybe I could just say, "I'm having trouble sleeping and Dewars doesn't do it for me anymore." Document. Can I get a pill? Ambien? Trazodone? Heroin? I didn't think he'd give me the opium, but I had a shot at the others. I lay there thinking I was the victim of raised standards. I used to think sleep was good enough, and now it wasn't. Perhaps I should reconsider? That scotch was in the trunk, not far at all. But it was 7 in the morning. I was 4 or 5 hours from home, from Mom, from my birthplace, from Father Rick, from Jane Austen Miller, the prettiest girl in the 9th grade. 8th grade too. Dad was there. Maybe I had friends I couldn't remember. The scotch was sounding better all of a sudden. I think the major was correct. I was definitely a candidate for neuroses. I pulled into the driveway at home about 3 in the afternoon. I hadn't touched the scotch, which felt like a victory, if a sad one. The sun was out. It was cool but not cold. Most of the leaves were still on the trees. The house and street and neighborhood all looked the same. I had last been here 2.5 years ago, just before I deployed with my platoon to Afghanistan. I had seen Mom and Dad upon my ignominious return, alone. They met my plane, but I had been in handcuffs at that point. I was allowed to say hi, kiss Mom, and head to the brigade to await a hearing. I was restricted to Camp Lejeune once a judge got me out of the brig, pending results of the investigation since there were no charges. We went to the beach a few times, the O Club, but then they had gone home and I had entered the long winter of my discontent. Now I was home. No job, no prospects, just out of jail, though, home. I pulled my 2 sea bags out of the trunk and back seat of the Mustang and locked the car. I carried things up the steps to the big front porch. I decided to knock. I didn't think it right to just walk in when I'd been away for years. I knocked. I waited. Then I rang the doorbell, and I heard Mom coming down the stairs. She was there. I think that moms can tell if one is suffering and can tell if one is suffering justifiably. She just looked at me for a few seconds. Ultimately, she pushed the storm door open and I was in her arms. I whispered, "No charges, Mom. I'm out of the Marines. Honorable discharge." She said, "You did what was right, Jonas. I don't know what you did. I don't know if anyone was hurt, but I know you did the best that could be done. I'm so glad you are home." I cried. I have cried many times over Gator. "So it goes," said Vonnegut. "I have an applicant here, Mrs. Gilchromie, a veteran requesting he be admitted for teacher education and history. A guy from the Marines. He wants to get his teaching license. He needs student teaching in 1 methods class. He also wants to start work on a master's in history. Got out of the Marines in October. Oh, he was in Afghanistan. But there is nothing about that in the record sent to us. Resume, application, some references." Marjorie Morningbloom just pointed out the obvious to her boss. "Is it on computer?" "Yes, ma'am," she responded. Barb Gilchromie called it up. Jonas Sims, bachelor's from Miami and Oxford, first lieutenant. Nothing about the details of service in Afghanistan. Honorable discharge. Do we have transcripts from Miami? Yes, ma'am, pretty good. 3.23 undergrad. Strong in English. Likes history, though. Weak in foreign language. Barely qualified with 2 years German. The dean looked at the documents, thinking, "I have a request here from Merciful Savior High for a more experienced student teacher to work full-time and move into a position. I think they had a teacher get sick. Here it is. This could be the guy. Is he Catholic?" "We don't ask that, Barb." But then Mrs. Morningbloom said quietly, "But yes, he is. It's in his military records." Crazy world, isn't it, Marge? I still would recommend him. Call him in. I'd like to talk to him. He fits this post, if he has enough presence. I'll give Marty a call out at Savior. Mrs. Morningbloom dialed the number on the application. It rang a house in Skygray, Ohio, not far from Cincinnati. "Hello?" A man's voice. "Hello. I'm Marjorie Morningbloom calling for Mr. Jonas Sims?" "Speaking, ma'am." "Mr. Sims, I'm trying to arrange an interview for you with Ms. Gilchromie, the Dean of the School of Education here at the University of Cincinnati." Morningbloom always liked to say the full name of the university. You see, just seemed to abbreviate the dignity of the school. "Yes, ma'am," replied Sims. "When would she like to see me?" "As soon as possible, sir. She has openings today and tomorrow if you can make one." "How about this afternoon?" Sims asked. He needed a half hour to shave. At least he was sober. "Will 2 o'clock work for you?" "Yes, I'll be there at 2. And so it was arranged. He hurried to shave and clean up. He needed to iron a shirt. At 2 he walked into Marjorie Morningbloom's office. "Mr. Sims?" "Yes, ma'am." "Right this way. Ms. Gilchromie is expecting you." She led him into an office cluttered with books, papers, and years of experience. Ms. Gilchromie rose and held out her hand. "Mr. Sims, I'm happy to meet you." "Thank you, ma'am." Before her stood a strong-looking young man, perhaps 25, with dark brown but short hair, wearing a sport coat and shirt with a button-down collar and a tie. He was wearing corduroy trousers. The clothes ensemble looked new, which it was. "Have a seat, Jonas. Is it okay if I call you that?" "Of course. May I call you Barb?" She laughed. "If you think it appropriate, then of course." "Thank you again, then, Ms. Gilchromie." She noticed the hint of a smile, and she appreciated his little gesture of respect. She returned it. "Mr. Sims, I called you in because your application indicates a desire to student teach. Almost all student teaching assignments were made long ago, but I have a last-minute request from a high school that a student teacher with outstanding credentials or greater than usual successful experience be allowed to student teach while performing the full duties of a teacher. To be plain, a teacher at one of the local schools has become ill and will be unable to fulfill her duties in the second semester. The school would like to fill the position with a student teacher as a full-time substitute using an emergency license. These are occasionally granted for cases like this. So you would be student teaching for us but working full-time as a teacher for them. You would be paid on the substitute schedule. We have a part-time social studies instructor who teaches at this school who would act as your mentor and cooperating teacher. You would also need to attend at least a methods class here, in the evenings or on weekends, depending on availability. Would you like to be considered for this position?" Jonas considered. It would mean more pressure, but he had already been a Marine officer. It might lead to a full-time permanent position next year. "Yes, I'd like to be considered." "Good. I hope you are flexible. They will want to meet with you soon. They do not want this hanging over their heads. Schools hate for tragedies to bog them down. I think you can understand. It is Merciful Savior High School in Skygray, which is where you live, correct? I'll call their principal as soon as we finish, send her your documents, and hopefully they will interview you soon. Thank you for everything, ma'am. She indicated he might leave, and she picked up the phone. Late that afternoon, Jonas received a call from Sharon Martin of Merciful Savior High School. Mr. Sims? Yes, this is Jonas Sims. Mr. Sims, this is Sharon Martin. I am the principal of Merciful Savior High School. We are just outside Skygray. I'd like to arrange an interview for a position here. Of course, Ms. Martin. I can come anytime. If you could make it tonight around 7, it would really help us. We are swamped with work right now. I'll be there at 7, ma'am. Ms. Gilchromie faxed us most of your documents, including a list of references. Are these current? More or less, ma'am. Although the local ones are less so. The main reference is Major Tom Marks. He and I worked closely together for the last 2 years. The other's father Rick was a childhood friend I lost touch with about the time I went into the Marines, etc. They were all longer ago. I don't see a commanding officer listed here from the Marines, Mr. Sims. No, I believe Major Marks may be able to shed some light on that, ma'am. Sims then went quiet, afraid he would say too much. I will certainly try to get in touch with him. I expect to see you in a few hours then, Mr. Sims. Jonas was worried. She was smart. At 6 o'clock, Sharon Martin and Father David Elkins met in the conference room next to Sharon's office. It's strange. He would not say why he didn't have his commanding officer as a reference. For the last 2 years, it seems he might be hiding something, she said. Yeah, all the vets we've interviewed have included their last commanding officers for sure. I wonder what this Marks will have to say. I reached his office. He's an attorney in D.C., in the Marine Reserves. He's supposed to call back. On cue, the phone rang. Hello? Merciful Savior High School. This is Principal Martin. May I help you? Tom Marks spoke up. Principal Martin? Tom Marks. Major Tom Marks when I am on duty. I understand you are calling to inquire about Jonas Sims, who I know as Lieutenant Jonas Sims, USMCR. Yes, Mr. Marks. I'm going to put you on speaker here. Father David Elkins is with me. We have the responsibility of hiring a new teacher and are considering hiring Jonas Sims. Hire him? I beg your pardon? Hire him. No one will do a better job for you. No one will work harder. No one will be better for your kids to be around. When Jonas Sims left the Marine Corps, the Corps lost its best young officer. Not one of the best. The best. Father Elkins looked at Principal Martin. His look said, "Is this for real?" Father Elkins, what was your relationship to Lieutenant Sims? Marks, I am a JAG officer. Lieutenant Sims and I work day in and day out on a court case. His case. I was assigned as his defense counsel. I cannot tell you what he was charged with. Actually, he was never charged. I can tell you nothing about the case. It is still classified, or I would tell you. I hope to have the reports and documents declassified, but it will not be this month. Martin, I wondered why he had no commanding officer's recommendation. Marks, that's because he was restricted to Camp Lejeune for 2 years. Officially, he worked for the base. In reality, he had no duties. He was not in the brig, but it was almost as bad. I wrote his fitness reports, and the commanding general signed them. As he was not writing them himself, and as he wanted no contact with Lieutenant Sims, the general demanded the evaluations be non-controversial. They were vanilla. It is unfortunate. Lieutenant Sims is extraordinary. Father Elkins, you really have us intrigued, Major Marks. Marks laughed. I will say something for the record if you want to record this. Here, I have known many brave men in the Marine Corps. I have known men who lost their lives saving others, selflessly acting when it would mean their own deaths. I have investigated brave men for the awarding of the Medal of Honor. So I do not say this lightly. Lieutenant Sims is the most morally courageous person I have ever met. You will see no medal or award. There is no statement in his file. I cannot tell you what happened or what he did. Maybe someday. He faced an impossible situation and acted morally when, I believe, most men would not. Father Elkins looked at Ms. Martin. She mouthed the word, wow. Father Elkins, could you repeat that? I want to copy it down. And so they did. Marks, I do not know if Lieutenant Sims will be a good teacher. I can tell you that his men trusted him implicitly. They to a man stood for him. I have never seen such loyalty. And from every one of them, there was a statement that Sims was the best lieutenant or best officer they had ever served with. I speak of his character. If I had children, I'd want them to be around as many teachers like Jonas as I could find. and I think you'll only find one. Martin, Major, are you given to overstatement, perhaps? Laughing, Mark said, Ma'am and sir, I only wish I had been able to save Lieutenant Sims's career in the Marines. Unfortunately, political considerations undermined his cause. He is a remarkable man. Oh, and he doesn't know it. Father Elkins, humility is more welcome in my business than yours. Mark said with a hint of humor, true. He is alone as far as the Corps goes. Humility is perhaps the virtue least recognized by the Marine Corps. He was placed in an impossible situation and behaved with integrity, grit, and with complete disregard for his own life and career. He realized his actions would threaten or end his career, he told his platoon sergeant. His after-action statements were scrupulously consistent, detailed, and true to every verifiable fact. The Corps ostracized him before it investigated, almost as completely as you hear happens at the academies. His friends disappeared. For the last 2 years he stood alone. Now that he is home, I hope he finds old friends and makes new ones. Father Elkins, I think you have given us a lot to think about. We may get back in touch with you, but I can say for myself I look forward to meeting him. There was a pause. Marks, feel free to contact me about him anytime. I only wish I could have helped him more. Thank you, and good night. Ms. Martin clicked off the phone. They sat in silence. Father Elkins said, I don't care if he can't teach. We have a responsibility to surround our kids with people of character. I've never heard such a recommendation. Let me check with a chaplain I know at Arlington. I want to find out if this Marks guy is something other than he claims. There were nights I didn't remember going to bed, and I'd find a half-full glass of whiskey sitting by my chair on an end table. I don't waste liquor, so I knew I must have been too drunk to justify, too drunk to think, too drunk to read, too drunk period. For some reason, it's the lost last hour of a small binge that finally brought me up short. I knew I was drinking to a problem, threatening my liver, my mind, the job I expected to start after Christmas, my plan for a master's, a future. Mom and Dad must have seen it, but they didn't say anything. They'd get up with me still asleep or in that like sleep state, and I'd awaken an hour or so later with a dirty, sour feeling. My hangovers didn't hurt, they just depressed. I wanted milk then. I knew I'd done wrong. Perhaps Mom and Dad felt like I needed the release. Perhaps they knew I needed something and just hoped and prayed I'd come around. They knew I wanted the job and the degree. Perhaps they trusted me who could not trust myself. Perhaps they just hoped it would go away with time and patience. Mom got me back to church. For some reason, she always felt Mass cured ills. Maybe it does. Father Rick is saying Mass at 9 Sunday, she said. But he's been given a new assignment, so he won't be here long. Rick had been my best friend up to 9th grade, when he had headed to Xavier and I'd headed to Sky Gray Public. He'd ended up in a seminary and was ordained while I was in the Marines. Right now, he was associate pastor of our home parish, Merciful God. I drove my Mustang to Mass about 10 minutes early and found a seat in the back. For some reason, I wanted to be unobtrusive. Some people went to Mass to be part of a community. I usually wanted solitude, introspection, prayer in a private way. But I was there, and by 9 the place was full. There on the right was Jane Miller Austin, prettiest girl in the 8th grade, 9th grade, and most other grades too, to be honest, now with a toddler holding one hand and an infant on her other arm. The unworthy husband, Austin, was carrying a diaper bag and a pumpkin seat. He was tall. I decided he looked smug, married to Jane and with 2 kids. I wanted some bourbon. I'd finished my half bottle of scotch and hadn't replenished it, and now I regretted it. Jane saw me from across the nave and smiled and nodded. I held up 2 fingers with a questioning look. She smiled and nodded again. She whispered to her smug husband, and he looked at me. I had to smile and nod at him, too. The cat. Rick was Rick. He was gregarious and joyful, and it came through his ceremony. He noticed me, I think for the first time, during the gospel. He hesitated and looked back down at the lectionary and repeated a whole sentence. During the petitions later, the reader finished her list and Rick added one. And for old friends returned safely home, Lord, hear our prayer. Teaching allayed my drinking almost completely, but it did not end my challenges. I learned to teach on the job. Most jobs are learned on the job, I believe. In my many years as a student, I had never realized the influences on my teachers that had nothing to do with school. I had assumed it was effortless. I looked back and wondered about that 5th grade teacher who disappeared in the middle of a year. That nun who was team teaching with another and then was not. The pressures Mrs. Frederick must have felt as she was larger and larger with child. In the classroom, every mistake must be quickly faced and resolved, because you had to face the same kids tomorrow. For me in those years, besides learning to prepare lessons and handle kids and avoid alienating parents, I had trouble with dreams. Even 2 years a teacher, I still dreamed of that day in Afghanistan. Jonas, Jonas. Someone was insistent. I wanted to sleep, but I pulled myself up from the dark. Mom, what is it? Am I late for work? She was sitting on my bed, and I felt her hand on my arm. As my eyes cleared, I could see Dad at the door to my room. No, you were dreaming. It was a nightmare. What did I say? You were calling out for people to hurry, to run, to hold on to some kids. You said, "Get that kid, silly. Turbo, don't drop her, don't drop her." You told someone called Bronstein to keep everyone moving. She had tears on her face. I was silent. The war is here too, I thought, inside me. You know, important things are really hard to keep secret, I said, smiling. I know you are not allowed to tell us what happened, said Dad, speaking to me. Just tell us things if you can. Are those people you mentioned dead? I relaxed. No, every person I named made it out of Afghanistan, as far as I know. Turbo and Silly and Bronstein, I know what I was dreaming about. They're alive. Did I mention maybe Paritsky? Mom and Dad shook their heads. None of my guys died that day. Dad went on. Son, it's been almost 4 years. You've been out of the Marines for 2 years. You've been a teacher for a lot longer than you were in combat. Don't you think you should get some help? See a counselor? Something? I thought about that. If I could open up about that incident. Maybe when they declassify it. I've been so careful not to breach the secrecy. I've told no one anything. I wish it would go away. Mom leaned over and kissed me. I wish so too. Her hair was gray. She looked suddenly old. What was she? 53. Dad was 55, heavy walking, quiet, holding up the doorway. I always wondered if he was very smart. He didn't seem to need to prove it one way or the other. I never wondered if I was loved, unlike some other guys. 27 and living at home? I couldn't think of a better situation. They'd never mentioned me moving out. I swung my feet over the side of the bed. 2 years ago, I'd returned from Camp Lejeune bereft, halfway to alcoholism, slipping into that restful but restless unhappiness called depression. But here in Sky Gray, things had started getting better. I was still teaching at Merciful Savior, still working on that master's at UC. It was now November. I should get the degree in June. I dressed for school thinking about lesson plans. What was today? Oh, yeah, the bank failures of the 1930s in US, the rise of Hitler in world history. It was that evening that I received a call from Lieutenant Colonel Marks. Hello? I'm trying to reach Jonas Sims. Speaking. Major Marks? Hello, Jonas. It's like Colonel now. Oh, and you are a captain in the IRR. Congratulations, and I had no idea I'd been promoted either. Figures. Well, it's happened. They declassified Alligator and all documents appertaining as of November 1st. They have now moved all physical files to the public access areas, and digital files are reindexed for public use also. As of today, matter of fact, anyone can see them now, Jonas. How should I feel, sir? If people find out, how will that be good for me? They'll have to read the detailed narrative, but the record is very clear. If they only check the summary, you may not fare so well. It mentions investigating you for disobedience, mutiny, etc. I am sending you as of 5 minutes ago copies of all files and documents. I checked them, they are exactly as filed years ago. I think you should print out a hard copy and keep it in a safe deposit box. Make lots of copies if you want to show friends, but keep one secure, in case someone only brings up the abstract. And make some digital copies too. Silence. I felt that a burden had been lifted. I think now I have some explaining to do to some people I've kept in the dark. So far no one seems to have noticed Alligator. They could have gotten access 28 days ago if they were waiting for the reports. There were a lot of other mundane documents declassified at the same time. But your story is remarkable, Jonas. I'd like to talk to you about that next week, if you don't mind. Of course, sir. Call me. No, I mean in person. I'll come there. Next Wednesday, okay? Strange. Of course. Next Wednesday. Want me to meet you at the airport? No, I'm not sure how I'll travel. I'll come to your parents' home? Is that where you are? Tom Marks pulled the rental into the driveway of the Simses' house. It looked like much of Middle America. Clapboard, big front porch, glider to the side, bay front window, porch light on. There was a ballpark behind the property. He got out. December now. Cool, not cold yet. Stars were appearing. Marks wore a sport coat and slacks, a tie, but he was decidedly casual. He considered wearing his uniform to impress the family, but decided he didn't want respect for that. He wanted something else he could not identify immediately. On the plane, he'd come to the conclusion he wanted friendship. Jonas was 13 years his junior, but he carried a thick briefcase with him. He rang the doorbell. He was met by a smaller, older woman, early 50s, graying hair, attractive, with a straightforward expression. "Mrs. Sims, I'm Tom Marks. Colonel Marks, I hope your trip was pleasant." "It has been. We're waiting for you in the living room. Please come in." It was a very pleasant meeting. Marks let the business of it go until some time had passed in reminiscence and catching up. There was laughter, which had been in short supply in the last years of Jonas's Marine experience. There were stories. Marks felt at home, and he understood where Jonas came from. They sat in some overstuffed chairs and a sofa and drank hot chocolate. There was no music on the stereo. At 9 o'clock, Marks said, "I have some business to conduct. Mr. and Mrs. Sims, I think you will want to stay, if that's all right with you, Jonas." "Of course, but I have not told them of Alligator yet." He looked at his dad. "I just couldn't find the right time or the words." Dad shook his head. "Whatever you did, whatever happened to you, we are your parents and we love you." Tom Marks had a smile of forbearance. In keeping his actions secret, Sims had created doubt and belief he was hiding some dark action that required forgiveness. The longer we keep silent, the more people will assume you have something to hide. Like these good people who love you more than anyone on earth. "I think the truth needs to be told, Jonas. I came to that conclusion, but I don't know who to tell or how." "Okay, well, let's start with what they know." Jonas was arrested and investigated for disobedience of an order, mutiny. At this, Dad inhaled deeply, murder, treason, and just about any other thing they could think of. It all stemmed from an order given by Captain Messina to conduct a hammer and anvil raid on a small village called Alligator. I have here one of Jonas's early statements. I recorded this. The original is in the just declassified files in Washington. He wrote it down, then read it, but he added to the written. He pulled a small recording device out of his case, put it on the coffee table, then hesitated to push play. "If you want something to eat or drink, or to go to the restroom, now is the time. You won't want me to stop this once it goes for a minute or two." They shook their heads and he pushed play. My platoon was 32 hard-charging grunts with bravado and chutzpah and belligerence, carrying the latest M16 versions and saws and some rockets, wearing armored vests and helmets and desert cam. Most of my men were late adolescent guys who didn't make college or wanted excitement or, like Summersill, had gotten in some trouble and wanted a new start. I think Silly actually was told by a magistrate to join the Marines, but I'd have to look up the records to be sure. Bronstein, who was Catholic, had gotten some girl pregnant, married her, and thought he could move her and a kid into the middle class by enlisting. I thought that might take a few years, but he was at least housing and feeding them. Turbish was huge. Some of the guys wanted on his fire team because he would provide cover. The platoon sergeant was Staff Sergeant Healy, a strange thin guy about 3 years older than I and 4 more in the Corps. He had OCD and would wash his hands scores of time per day. The captain had conferred with him several times about this. "Oh, I'm the platoon commander, Jonas Sims of Ohio." At the time of these events I was 23, Healy was 27 I guess, Turbo and Silly were 19 and Bronstein 21. All the officers in the company had comms radios linked. My squad leaders and platoon sergeant too, on a separate frequency. With flick of a switch I could contact the captain or my squad leaders, or the other platoon leaders if they were close enough. The helmet radios were not strong enough to contact a mile away in these hills, unless you had line of sight and good luck. We were outside Alligator or something like that. We'd never been there, or we'd been there and forgotten. But we were there that day. It was our 4th month in country and Afghanistan still looked like shit. Men, women, countryside, country, shit. The men had bad teeth and breath, and the women were not allowed to notice us. Nice houses had rubble in the hallways and rooms, unbroken windows were rare things, and water pipes rarely had water, electrical lines rarely had electricity. If there were sewers they smelled or backed up most of the time, and the place was a dump. Actually, the dump outside Alligator was nicer than the town. But the important thing in this place seemed to be that the men do as little work as possible. Success was doing little and still getting by. I knew some fellow students who had that policy in school, so it reminded me of home. It was hot, which was a good reason to do nothing, but doing nothing leads to backed up sewers and rubble in your halls. At 9 that day, 2D platoon was going to attack Gator because we had solid evidence that the place was occupied by Taliban or ISIS or even still bin Laden's group. When the captain briefed us platoon commanders, he asked for questions and I said, "Sir, what is the source of our intelligence?" Captain Messina looked at me as if I was overstepping bounds. He said, "Well, I am your source, Lieutenant. My source was the colonel commanding this battalion. And he got the information from a source so impeccable it can't be revealed to the likes of you. Which got him a chuckle, got me some looks of derision, and I knew better than to ask of weapons of mass destruction. I was also skeptical of the information. 2D will attack with guns blazing. We understand the enemy is in some numbers, 40 or more combatants. We want the fire to be so aggressive as to force combatants out the east end of the village. Townspeople have been moved to cellars already by choice or force by the enemy. Sims, you will approach from the west along the road. The town is 2 rows of a total of about 40 structures, right along the broken formerly paved road. Notice the pictures. At 9 guns ablazing, you recon by fire the near houses and then clear them. They only have 2 or 4 rooms and 1 floor for most. Don't forget those cellars. You may, if you can't tell who's who, consider the place a free fire zone. Hear me, gentlemen? Intel is solid. This place is bad guys. Do not endanger yourself or your men. I want dead ragheads, not Marines. Clear everyone from inside. If any survive, take them to the first building and guard them all. We don't want any Taliban hiding out behind us. We'll organize them or terminate once we sort them out then. Organize or terminate. I remember thinking, 1st Platoon, Lieutenant Kelly, will approach the east side of the village. Your job is to cut off and kill any Taliban that flee the 2D platoon attack. You'll come over the top of the ridge and down toward the road just before 9. Set up what is essentially an ambush. You'll have 2 attached machine gun teams from weapons platoon, sweeping fire on the road, about 100 yards from the village, plunging fire from the ridge side for the rest of the platoon. Oh, don't forget flank and rear security. Your platoon is supported by 3D, but they'll be well on the other side of the ridge, so they can move to you or 2D. The discussion was focused on maps for quite some time. A hello insert. Hello extract. Avoid prisoners. Prisoners tended to return to the battlefield after visiting a camp by this point in the war. Lots of details were ironed out. By midnight, we were tired and ready to brief our men. I had never heard murder discussed so offhandedly, but I knew the protocol for dealing with an illegal order. Following it, I would be relieved of my command immediately and the attack would go on. I knew how to follow the orders and give myself options during the coming action, and I determined to do it. Later, I spoke to Healy. What do you think, Staff Sergeant? Healy and I were sitting at a table in our fob area. We had a lamp, a map, some Coke, t-shirts. He wants to wipe out the town, doesn't he? Healy said quietly. His voice was monotone. His hand was around a pop can. His hands so white from thousands of unnecessary cleanings. That's how I make it. Clear everyone out. Shoot first. Aggressive. Heard them. Body counts? I mused morosely, without humor. It was now about 1:30. We'd board choppers at 7:45, drop around a half hour later, and approach the town about a mile away at 9. I had been assured the flanking ridges were unoccupied. We'll put first squad on the left of the road, second on the right, and third back, V formation. I paused. I'm not a murderer, Ken. We'll follow orders, but I'll find a way. Could be the end of my career tomorrow, I said. Well, at least it'll be with guns ablazing, as the captain said. There was a pressure around my heart or in my stomach. I couldn't tell, but pressure. I said, you'd better get some sleep. I need to think how to do things. Good night, sir. I briefed the squad leaders at 5:30. I followed the 5-paragraph format. I was very specific about the onset of the attack, should the mission proceed according to plan. I wanted controlled fire. Guns might blaze, but I wanted coordination, legal targets, and control. I even ordered how many rounds should be fired at certain times, and their targets. They briefed their men at 6:15. We ate. We loaded up. We were at the Hellos at 7. We boarded at 7:35. We lifted on time. We dropped on time at the LZ. Hellos are not quiet. They must have known we were coming. It was only a mile from the drop. We formed a V of the 3 squads with some flank security up the sides of the ridges to each side of the road, at least up to the military crest of each ridge. Sitting ducks where we should the enemy be there, but the Hellos had not noticed anything and our intel was impeccable, as always. The ridge tops were empty of ambushers and we double-timed, because we were out in the open, to the village, getting there in a 100-degree morning about 15 minutes early. We were about 400 yards away. I ordered first squad up the ridge side to the left. I ordered second up the right ridge side. The captain said by radio that first platoon was in position. I notified the captain we were commencing attack. Over my headset, squad leaders, as you were instructed, 5 rounds each designated man. High aim, commence fire in 30 seconds, my command. That gave them time to notify their people and remind them quickly of the plan. At time I said, second platoon, designated Marines fire. In 10 seconds, 100 rounds from one fire team in each of 1st and 2nd squads flew into the nearest buildings on either side of the road. Silence followed. Again, another 100 rounds flew down, and it was now obvious that the rounds were hitting high in every room. There was no return fire. I was pleased with the controlled reconnaissance by fire. I contacted the captain. "Sir, no return fire, commencing approach." I blew my whistle and 3rd squad ran down the road under the careful overwatch of 1st and 2nd squads up on the ridge sides. I ordered 1st and 2nd to begin moving forward along those ridge sides, maintaining the overwatch of those in the village. 3rd squad leader reported, "Sir, right side, 6 civilians here in cellar, no combatants, no weapons. Evacuating non-combatants to designated position." "Sir, 2nd squad, I can see people fleeing houses down the main road and heading east. No weapons, looks like women, kids. So the non-combatants were not safely hiding in their cellars. Carry on, all. 3rd, clear those buildings, mark him as you go. I don't want any friendly fire accident." I notified the captain we had received no fire and that civilians were heading his way. "What the hell is that, Sims? I do not hear much fire from your position, and you will carry out your orders." "Yes, sir," I replied. "So far no combatants." I notified 1st and 2nd squads. "Captain wants more fire. Commence fire, like we planned. Keep it high until you have combatants to aim at. Everyone alert. Intel says they are here. Report any incoming fire." And so, we fired into the sky, mostly, or at far hillsides, or targets of opportunity like a rock 600 yards away. But it motivated the non-combatant villagers to move faster, assuming the bullets were coming for them. And then I heard it. US machine guns have a distinctive sound, and they were opening up on the far side of town. I could hear conversation about ducks on a pond on the 1st platoon net, and I thought, oh my god, my guys were speaking. 1st and 2nd squads being up the hillsides could see the far side of the village. "Mr. Sims, they're mowing him down, sir. It's almost all women and kids. I see some old men who have trouble moving. The guns are." Someone else added, "They are pointing them to get in line by the building, sir. I think they're gonna." I had a cold feeling. Healy was running back from the edge of the village. He reached me, with a look in his eyes aghast or perhaps disbelieving. "This can't be happening." I cleared my platoon comms and took over. "Listen to me, 2nd platoon. I am giving orders. We are Marines, not individuals. We control our fire. No questions right now. Right now. 3rd, how far are you down the village?" Corporal Bronstein, "Sir, about a 1/3. But we've seen no combatants, no weapons, nothing. No one left in the buildings as we reached them. Just non-combatants hiding or running away. A lot of them." I said, "All right, 1st squad, stay on the west side of the village. Gather as many non-combatants and protect them at this end. Put them in the nearest buildings and protect them. Do it." Sergeant Lynch, "Yes, sir." I assumed he went to his task then. I did not see him until after I was relieved. "2nd squad," I said, "proceed along the south ridge to the east side of the village and take a position to protect any non-combatants we can. Try to keep them in the village. Do you understand me, Corporal Williams? On line, down the ridge side, facing 1st platoon, but not too close. Do not fire unless you are fired upon. Is that clear?" Healy was looking at me like the world was ending. Mine was. "Oh my foo," Williams started to say, and I cut him off. "Do you all hear me? This is on me. I am giving you lawful orders. Do you understand? We control our fire. We are Marines. Corporal Williams, do you understand your orders?" "Yes, sir." "Good man. Carry them out. Semper Fi. Bronstein, I am coming to join you. As soon as I am there, I want Turbish, Summersill, and Paritsky, whoever else is in that fire team, and we'll be running to the far end. Hell or high water, we're cutting through. Do you hear me?" "Yes, sir." "They will be ready. I'll have the others attempt to cover you. From Taliban or Marines." I thought. I looked at Healy. "If I'm killed, explain what happened here. If I live, come explain it to me, please. Good luck, Mr. Sims." I took off. I was a good but not great runner, but considering the heat, the weapons and equipment we were carrying, boots, helmet, light pack, we did what we could. I ran right down the middle of the road, past non-combatants huddled in houses and some in doorways. I yelled and pointed for them to go to the west, but I kept running. I reached Bronstein's position and Silly, Turbo, Leininger, and Paritsky joined up with me, keeping as far apart as possible. We had another 250 yards to go, so I found myself wondering about inconsequentials like why Paritsky had no nickname and I could never remember Leininger, but then I forced myself back on task. We ran, perspiration soaking our clothes and dripping from noses and chins and hands. Machine gun fire was ripping across the open space beyond the last houses. I saw the occasional tracer. Villagers were everywhere, huddled in groups behind building walls, dark eyes filled with fear and wonder. There were few men. Mostly they were old or women with children, trying to save themselves. I looked out beyond the final houses. In a field were bodies. Women, some children. I saw no men, but there must have been some. There was a line of non-combatants along the last building wall on the side facing 1st Platoon. Somehow they had lined up over there. Then they were pounded by 7.62 rounds from a light machine gun. The wall was smoking, and they were down. I did not count or estimate. Rounds were firing into the houses from up on the hillside. 200 yards away, Kelly's platoon was firing at anyone leaving the village and at anyone near the buildings on this side. There was a young guy missing a foot from an old injury or operation, leaning against a wall, staying out of sight from the hill. Some old guy was sitting next to him with his back to a building wall, staring at me, holding a cane or stick. Oh my God, sir, they killed them all. I think that came from Williams up the hill, who would have had a good view of the whole thing. Captain Messina cut into my comm. Sims, there are people in that village and they are no longer moving east. Now what is going on? Sir, I said, they don't want to get murdered by 1st Platoon, so they refuse to leave. I am moving them back to a safe location with my platoon. I heard him start to say something when I put him out of my mind. I said, Summersill, clear anyone out of these buildings on that side. Don't let 1st Platoon see you if you can help it. When the game went a final shit, 1st Platoon repositioned a machine gun team. They began firing plunging fire from the ridge side into the village buildings. I opened comm to Kelly and perhaps his platoon. Kelly, I have men in those buildings. Cease your fire, cease your fire. But it kept on, chewing up the building with the crippled kid and ending his hard life. Summersill escaped injury by luck. I lost sight of the old man. I called Williams. Do you see the machine guns firing at us? Yes, sir. My God, sir. Those two are about 200 yards from us. My guys on the right can see them clearly. Williams, who's on the right? I am. So is Tomilo, and Alan. We need covering fire. I wished I had smoke. I didn't. The guns switched to the house on the far side of the street. I said, silly, turbo boost, lining her, as soon as we open fire. Take those people in your own but back down that road, and get all the people down that road to 1st squad on your right in that direction. Don't miss any but get going. Got me? Ready, sir. Sir. Nods. I imagine nods if I didn't see them. Paritsky, you and I are last. Covering fire. I aimed and fired where I thought the guns were. Paritsky poked his saw around a corner and fired up the hill. Tomilo and Alan fired in front of the offending guns, but were hesitant. They did fire. One of the guns on the hill ceased fire. All right, we've done enough here. Go, go, go. Williams, get your men out and back to the west end of the village. Protect our non-combatants and yourselves. Now get moving. Soon up on the hillside and down in the village, there was a population shift to the west. Marines picked up kids by the backs of their shirts and ran from the fire. Mothers in burqas jogged along with babes in their arms, sometimes. I kept the last of them in front of me, and I looked back trying to see if anyone was coming. I thought of all the rules I'd broken, ignoring IED possibilities, booby-trapped homes, suicidal enemies, and I was now herding 100 or so non-combatants down a road. There was Turbo with a woman carried under his left arm and a rifle in his right. Silly with 2 kids crying but moving along the right side houses ready to duck into doorways. Paritsky covered us. He aimed and fired bursts, aimed and burst, aimed and burst. He may have saved a lot of lives. I saw him kick some kid because he didn't have a free hand and the kid was just crying, frightened to move. It did get him moving. Bunches of people crawled, hobbled, cried, and ran down the street toward the west in safety. I was firing to the east to slow any pursuing fire. As we reached Bronstein and his other fire team, I signaled him to move back to the west side. His Marines dispersed among the non-combatant groups and encouraged them to move faster. One Marine had a guy over his shoulders in a fireman's carry. We withdrew. Fire from 1st Platoon finally withered and ended, as we were beyond their effective range and view halfway down the village. At the west end, there were some buildings Marines pointed the non-combatants into, but basically everyone just huddled together and cried. I contacted Healy and he gave me some numbers. No casualties for my platoon, some among the non-combatants, a bunch of people under our protection in the first houses. Marines were helping those who were bleeding. We had no corpsmen. Captain Messina was screaming into my ear when I decided I could pay attention to him. The first part of his yelling about disobeying orders was all jumbled up, but the second was clear. Sims, what the hell was that? Were you firing on 1st Platoon? Oh my God, you must have gone crazy. You killed a Marine. I'm relieving you, Lieutenant. Healy should take over immediately. Very well, sir. We have taken no casualties. We have 132 non-combatants safe at the west end of the village. We are consolidating a defensive perimeter there. Sims standing down. Healy was then in contact with the captain. I watched him speaking into his mic, but rarely. I think he was getting an earful from the captain. I looked about. Sunny, hot, relentless and oppressive brightness and heat. Old buildings, broken pavement, glass, rubble. Marines consolidating, preparing for a counterattack from the enemy. Perhaps 1st Platoon, with Captain Messina leading the way with guns ablazon. But the intel it was solid. It was silent. Marks hesitated. He looked directly at Mom and Dad. Actually, 2 Marines died. When they moved their machine gun to fire down on the buildings they didn't expect to take fire and took an exposed position. Some of 2D platoons covering fire killed them. This whole thing is classified as a friendly fire incident. Jonas said, Ray Zumwalt and Shannon Smith. Mom had tears streaming down her face. Dad was unwilling to talk. Mom got up and walked over to me, put her arms around me, and hugged. She whispered, I have never been so proud of anyone in my life. I am so glad I am your mother. It was quiet while she hugged Jonas. Your report was almost perfect, Jonas, said Marks quietly. Every Marine in your platoon, every one of their statements, corroborated yours almost word for word. I didn't tell Healy you mentioned his OCD. I didn't tell a few others about other little comments. You called Healy strange, said Bronstein was Catholic, things like that. Bronstein says everyone assumes he's Jewish, so I used to mock him calling him the Catholic. But for things like that, they all heard what you said. Dad spoke. You saved 132 people. Mark said, actually it was more like 158, but his numbers at the time were confused. Dad said, it was the deaths of the 2 Marines that led to an investigation for murder? Why was it secret? Why is there anything to worry about? For some reason, some higher-ups rewarded Captain now Major Messina and 1st Lieutenant Kelly for their victory within hours of the incident. 29 dead Taliban were reported, most in that field at the end of the village. They mowed down the first wave of non-combatants without bothering to identify them. They followed Messina's guns ablazon principle that Jonas was so skeptical of. Some of those dead Taliban were under 2 years old. Is there proof? Jonas stood up. No, there is none. Marks looked at Jonas and shook his head. Then he said, I wouldn't say that. Why don't we go to the kitchen table? I have some things to show you. At the table, Marks got out a large manila folder. I had these enlarged. This may be gruesome. You may want to look away. Some of Jonas's platoon had cell phones with them, against regulations, but they pulled them out and took some quick pictures during the battle. He pulled out a picture, pointed to various parts as he talked. In this one, you see the field at the end of the village. If you look closely, you can see women in burqas and over here is a child. Also in this one you see this kid huddling against the building here. That is an old man next to him. And this one taken a minute later is blurry, but the same kid dead, and that is what is left of the building. It is clear in the first picture the kid is a cripple with a stick, not a combatant. There are 1 or 2 others from the field, but the rest are of the non-combatants huddled together under the watch of the Marines at the west end of the village. Mom asked, are there any pictures of Jonas? Mark smiled. 2. Here he is running down the center of the road with a kid in his arms. In the background, you could see Turbo carrying a sack under his left arm. That in reality was a woman. Jonas said, I don't remember doing that. Mark said, I know, but that is you and you did it. Marks continued, and here he is just after he was relieved, helping wrap a kid's foot. I can't tell if he was bleeding or just turned his ankle. Silly had his phone, didn't he? Jonas asked. Disobeyed my orders. Standing orders. Yup. He said he'd have taken more, but he was busy. Mom and Dad were poring over the pictures, so strangely far away, with their son doing things they had not suspected. Mark said, I think it was the picture of you carrying the kid, with Turbish carrying the woman, that got the charges pushed aside. It's hard to see American heroism in the face of American atrocity and reward those responsible for the latter. Oh, I've made about 100 copies of these pictures. It was quiet. Mom would make a statement or observation of the pictures. I've never seen Jonas in his combat getup, or look over at this, or just, oh my. Dad would say, is this him? Or what is this guy doing? Or things of that nature. They studied those 9 pictures. Now I am almost afraid to tell you the next. I am not here because of any of this. I could have sent the pictures. And while a pleasant evening with friends is always good, I came because I want Jonas's approval of something I am doing. Marks actually looked awkward, as if he had committed a transgression and wanted forgiveness. Marks continued on after a deep breath. I have written a novel based on the Alligator Massacre. I can't think of what else to call it. I wrote it as a novel because I thought it would increase readership and perhaps protect Jonas from everyday scrutiny. But I can't account for every sentence in the book except for the names of the participants. Every word is true, to my knowledge. It took me over a year to write, and I'd like Jonas's approval before it hits the bookstores. I don't want your approval because it will change whether or not it is published. Sooner or later, Alligator is going to come out. I mean, Kelly's dad is in the Senate. Sooner or later someone will look into his career in the war. I want your approval, your criticism, your thoughts on the book. You and I probably know more about Alligator than anyone. Marks opened his case one more time and took out 3 hardbound copies of his new novel. He gave one to each of the family. Jeremiah in Agony, by Tom Marks. Based on an incident in the war in Afghanistan. The cover pictured a soldier or Marine with haunted eyes kneeling beside a child on the ground. He was dirty and unshaven, and it reminded me of a movie poster for The Thin Red Line. The book was about 300 pages, hardback, and the print was not large. Production values were first-rate, he thought. It was very well done. The publisher was Novel America. Well, Tom, Jonas thought aloud, you must know someone in the publishing industry. Actually, my sister is the editor, he said. We had the whole thing written except for the classified chapters. I wrote those 3 chapters 1,000 times in my head, but until they declassified a few months ago, I put nothing to paper. Then I wrote for 2 weeks, draft after draft. I think it came out well. My sister is pleased, which means her boss is pleased too. They want to send it to stores shortly. I asked them to delay until you had a chance to read it. Mom and Dad were paging through. Jonas was also. Can you keep my name out of it? I mean, can you just refuse to say who I am? I can. I will, if you want me to. I think it is a mistake. Why? Asked Mom. Anyone doing a cursory examination of the JAG files will see the summary page. That page mentions that First Lieutenant Jonas Sims was investigated for possible charges of mutiny, disobedience, murder, and several other things. It says no charges were finally brought. It makes no mention of what he actually did. For that, you'd have to go to the pages of his recorded statements, the 29-page narrative of actions at Alligator, and find the occasional statements of his actions and put them together. It would take someone who wanted an in-depth story or a book. Then, Tom, I ask you to protect me. Protect my integrity. My privacy, too. If you feel my name should come out, choose the proper time and release it. Until then, just tell people that I'd prefer to finish school, teach, maybe coach the baseball team or girls basketball or something. Marks noticed that Jonas had called him Tom. Marks said, then that is how I will do it. I can keep the secret for quite a while, but it is a quick search to find the Alligator incident file, and your name is on the front. It was 11:30. Marks stood. Mr. and Mrs. Sims, it has been a genuine pleasure to meet you. I've wanted to meet Jonas's parents for some time. He hesitated, then held his hand out to Dad. Your son is a hero in the middle of a tragedy. He was faced with Callie's decision, and he made the right one, without any pause. They shook. Yes, Mom said. We have always been proud of him. Now we know. Jonas said, Mom, enough. Tom, I'll read the book as soon as I can. Thanks for coming. Marks led the way to the door, said goodnight, and left. Mom came up behind Jonas and hugged him and cried, remembering all those sleepless nights worrying that something might be happening to Jonas at that very instant on the other side of the world. I opened Jeremiah after school the next day. I opened it to the beginning. I did not have class this night, thank goodness. It was 3:30 in the morning when I closed the book. A few thoughts had come to me as I read. Tom Marks was a writer, and not just a good one. I wondered if he was misguided going into the law. I was amazed at the depth of the characters, the clarity of the action. Chapter 16, describing the actual incident, was a masterpiece describing the actions of dozens of Americans in 2 small units, confronting one another over the lives of non-combatants trapped on a battlefield. Chapter 15 had made me question my perspective, if not my decisions. Chapter 17 justified me, and made me wonder at the motives of the Marine Corps. More than that, the motives of the United States. I sat and thought about the book. I called Tom. He answered, at 4 a.m. Hello? Tom, Jonas Sims. Finished the book. Yeah. I could tell he was waking up, his voice foggy. Gonna change my life, you know, I said. Pause. Yeah, it may take them a while to figure out the real case. A little longer to read the general officer's report on the incident, he said. No, Tom, I mean the book. The book will change my life. I'm still ticked at you for writing it, though. Pause. Thanks, Jonas. I'm sorry it will all come out. Soon, too, maybe. It was a slow conversation at 4 a.m. Maybe for the best. When's it in the bookstores? Soon. It's ready to ship now, printed and boxed, and the publisher knew the incident was being declassified. They are advertising now, and the tour is growing daily. Maybe a month before it's in the stores. He paused. They want it out soon. It's scary how good your writing is, Tom. Why'd you become a lawyer? He said wryly, I wanted to keep good guys out of the brig. Pause. Thanks. I need to get to sleep. Doubt if I can. Probably show a movie in class today, I said. Jonas, really thanks for calling. I thought you might not forgive me, he said. Nah, that book is well, I know who my friends are. I gotta go, talk to you later, good night. Mom and Dad finished the book over the next few days and had many questions and comments. Mom even wrote a letter to Tom, thanking him for giving them a better insight into their son's life. Dad, who I think has read 2 books in his life, one being A Guide to Home Plumbing, kept asking me about this incident and this guy and that gun and what Afghanistan was like. He was underlining things in the book, writing notes in the margin. Whenever I was home, he'd bring something up. It was a side of him I'd never seen. I asked them, have you told anyone about the book? I mean, about what happened to me over there. No, we have talked in general, but we haven't mentioned the details or Alligator or anything. We discussed this late into the night the other night. We don't want to brag about your actions. We think it looks self-serving. And ultimately, it's a tragedy. The whole thing. It was a murder, an atrocity. You just did the right thing, and that is enough. When people find out you were the guy in the book, then we'll talk more. Maybe. Jeremiah in Agony was in bookstores before Christmas. It was reviewed very positively 2 weeks before by a famous author in the New York Times Book Review. Tom was on morning talk shows, morning drive radio shows, interviewed in Vanity Fair, of all things. I hadn't realized his reputation as a lawyer. I had been told he was the best, but I hadn't realized he was well known in legal circles. This was not his first book. It was his first novel. He said that Jeremiah was a real person. When asked to prove it, he said did it matter. He also said he did not change the names to protect Jeremiah. He said he did it to protect some of the others who had acted with poorer judgment. Overall, the Marine Corps sat back and watched. I saw no comments from anyone in my platoon or company or battalion. Maybe they don't read much, but I received 2 Christmas cards this year. One was from a car dealer, but the other was from Ken Healy. On the back it said, "So you think OCD is strange, huh?" Well, I can tell you it is completely strange, and you know you were doing it anyway. I hope you have a Merry Christmas, Jonas. You saved a lot of lives. Proud to have been in 2nd Platoon. He signed it Gunnery Sergeant Ken Healy, 3 of 6. I laughed, thinking he was a good sport. He must have read it as soon as it hit the stores. I wrote him a note, finding his return address on the envelope. I mentioned that his actions that day had been loyal and humane and brave. I said without my platoon's support and willingness to obey orders, a lot more people would have died, and I would have had difficulties. And I thanked him. I signed it, High School History Teacher Jonas Sims. I had rank 2. By New Year's Day, Jeremiah in Agony was a bestseller. Tom sent me an email that he was signing books the next week at the Joseph Beth Booksellers store in Norwood, Ohio, not too far from Sky Gray, and actually within a few miles of the University of Cincinnati. I promised to come hear him and maybe get my copy signed. I had the first meeting of my American Wars seminar that same day in the late afternoon, at 4 o'clock, just giving me time to get there after school ended at 2:20, so I could then swing over to see Tom signing at 7. I made it to the seminar just before it was to begin. In the room were 11 students, which does not mean young people. Graduate level classes are often filled with the middle-aged or the mid-career person. I was actually one of the youngest there. Barry Lynn taught this course. By this point, I would say he led the course. Barry was my advisor, and I had been looking forward to taking his class for some time. Finally, I had been able to fit it into my schedule. He promised I would like the readings. He intimated there was a girl he wanted me to meet. Since there were only 2 women in the room, and since the one woman was old enough to be Barry's mother, I assumed that the little redhead was the subject of his matchmaking. She sat across from me, and one down. Good evening. I'm Professor Lind, and this is the American Wars Colloquium. I know some of you already from here at UC, and I'm sure some of you know one another. Why don't we take a few minutes and introduce ourselves for those who don't? Just say your name, where you are from, what you are doing, your goals, innermost desires, that sort of thing. People were smiling at the desires comment. Why don't we start over here on my left and work our way around the table? He looked at me with darts in his eyes. I so wanted to laugh. Okay, I'm Jonas Sims and I teach freshman and sophomore history classes out at Merciful Savior High School in Skygray. I am trying to earn a history master's so that I may teach in college, eventually, but I'm really liking my time at Savior. I have a bachelor's from Miami. I shut up then, despite the death rays shooting from Barry's eyes at me for my mundane description. Having set the standards so low, I now listen to 9 other renditions of insignificance about ourselves. 1 or 2 went on. When it came the redhead's turn, I did pay some attention. Hi, Emily Scott. I'm working on a degree in American literature and I needed some history coursework, so I've taken 2 courses now from Dr. Lind. I'm working on a thesis about fictional representations of Americans at war. I hope to be able to teach in college once I have the degree. I spent 2 years in the Peace Corps in Sub-Saharan Africa working with Ebola decontamination before I came here. I'm from Fairfield and still live there. Barry was smug. See, you didn't have to be boring. It would serve you right, Sims, if she never spoke to you. Emily was petite, perhaps 5 feet 1 inch, with bright red hair, some freckles, and a runner's perkiness. She wore no rings on her fingers but had earrings and wore a sweater that gave her a Lana Turner sexiness. It was good, I thought, that Fairfield is only a few miles from Skygray. Okay, a little more than a few. It was an hour later that Barry gave us a 10-minute break and I checked my phone. There was one message from Tom Marks. Barry walked over. Opportunities are fleeting, Sims. Then he walked toward the restrooms. I pulled up the message. Jonas, in town and heading to Joseph Beth. My sister is with me. Would like to get something to eat after the signing if you'd like to join us. And take us to a decent place to eat. I called him. Tom. Jonas, just got to Joseph Beth. So can you join us for supper? Yeah, I know a German place near there. Harkens back to Cincinnati's German heritage. You paying? Of course. I'm on an expense account. My sister is looking at me like that may not be a good attitude. See you in an hour or so? I'll be there. Might be late. The students were filtering back into the room. Barry came over. So are you going to ask her out? He asked. Haven't said anything to her yet. She's cute though. He looked at me like I was blind. Cute, Sims. Don't be an idiot. He left then, and we started up the class again. We were discussing our projects, required for the course, and what we intended to study. I was interested in the modern leadership system in the military, rotating officers through the combat roles without regard to perceived success or failure or maintenance of the status quo. One of the other students was studying strategy and how it had changed with the advancement in weapons systems. Another was studying the structure of the U.S. Army from the revolution to Afghanistan. I didn't see where that one was going, but maybe it would mean something. The other, older woman, Barb Ford, was studying the influence of women since the First World War. I thought that might be interesting if she did a good job. Emily spoke. I'm comparing fiction of Americans at war from Vietnam to now. I'm selecting novels from Vietnam, the Gulf War, and the current wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and comparing their themes, attitudes toward policy, toward the military, that sort of thing. There is a new novel about Afghanistan with graphic depiction of a battle and atrocity that is getting a lot of attention recently, she said, pulling a copy of Jeremiah in Agony from her bag on the floor. I really like the novel, and the author claims it is all true and based on official documents. But nowhere does he give a real name or date. I can't find the name of the incident anywhere. The author is giving a talk at Joseph Beth in an hour, so I'll see if he will help me or something. She sat down. Barry said, I think hitting up the author is a great idea if you have that kind of luck. If you can get an email address often works too. I've corresponded with many authors over the years. It seems quite a coincidence him being here now. I almost laughed aloud. Barry saw me and gave me a querying look, but I just shook it off. How did you pick this topic? I asked Emily. When I was in Africa, I came across the murder of a bunch of schoolgirls in Ghana by rebels. I decided to look into this sort of thing. I nodded and let it go. Tom Marks had said it would take somebody writing a book or an in-depth investigation to find the information. Ms. Scott seemed to be the first, except for Tom himself. I wondered if I should help her. Class finished shortly after 6 and I went in my car. Barry looked at me as I left. I smiled and laughed and waved him off, saying, I'll talk to you about it another time. I have an appointment. The drive to Joseph Beth took only a few minutes. I was there at 6:40. Chairs were set up in front of a fireplace, with tables full of Jeremiah in Agony stacks. 2 other books by Tom were also available, Capital Punishment in Military Courts and Defending the Dobus Murderer, Tom's other most famous case. Tom was there laughing and talking with a tall woman who must be his sister. She was about 40 with brown hair and smart glasses. She was round but not overweight and had a wedding ring. He did not notice me when I walked in. Behind me, I heard, "Are you following me?" I turned and saw Emily Scott a few feet away. "No, I had planned to be here when you mentioned it. I'm Jonas Sims, if you don't remember." I held out my hand and she shook it, not sure if she believed my explanation. "Would you mind if I sit alone?" she asked. "I need to ask Mark some questions and I may give him a hard time." "Of course," I answered, wondering how tough can a book signing be? I usually prefer to stand, that way I can disappear if the subject gets dull. Others were now sitting in the seats. People were picking up copies. Tom saw me and waved, but he was speaking to some others so he could not break away. Most of the chairs were full, and then it was 7 and they were full, and there were others like me standing. I leaned against a bookshelf. Emily was in the middle. I wondered if her attitude was partly a result of her stature. The tall woman who had been standing with Tom went to the lectern that was just off to the side of the fireplace. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am representing the publisher of Jeremiah in Agony, Novel America. My name is Jennifer Jones, and if you notice I resemble Tom Marks, it is because he is also my brother. Tom has been a JAG lawyer with the Marines for 20 years now. He is a lieutenant colonel in the reserves. He also works for Thompson, Brash, and Jones law firm in Washington, D.C., she said. He has 2 other books in print, which you may see and purchase from the table to my far right. But we are here to talk about this remarkable book you see and hear about everywhere, Jeremiah in Agony. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Marks." There was a smattering of applause. Perhaps 50 people were paying attention. Tom was a gifted writer. He was also a forthright and convincing speaker. He told stories, he mentioned characters, he talked about defending me, he talked about the case. He only spoke for about 20 minutes. At the end he said, "It has been my duty and my honor to defend the real Jeremiah. He is my friend. This is my first bookstore. I chose it for a reason. Jeremiah, the real Jeremiah, buys books here. I'd like to read you a very short statement which is in the novel. In real life, I received a call from an employer considering hiring the real Jeremiah Perkins for a job. I said, actually, I read them this. I have known many brave men in the Marine Corps. I have known men who lost their lives saving others, selflessly acting when it would mean their own deaths. I have investigated brave men for the awarding of the Medal of Honor. So I do not say this lightly. Lieutenant Perkins is the most morally courageous person I have ever met. You will see no medal or award. There is no statement in his file. I cannot tell you what happened or what he did.